Capel,
Hi.
and we are from LightNet, and we are a community that make the impossible possible. From spoon bending to talking to ETs, it's all possible. And we have a brand new site at ourlightnet.org where you can make your impossible possible. We are here tonight with Dr. Simeon Hein, who is one person that we have invited back to the Unlimited show. We haven't really had that occurrence where we've invited people back, but Dr. Simeon Hein was one of my absolute favorite guests we've ever had. Why? Because he's brilliant. Also, he spent decades and decades researching his curiosities. He started out understanding sociology and statistics and then went into crop circles and fractal geometries, right? And then UFOs, orbs, Bigfoot, all of these phenomenon he is studying with the scientific mind. He's also an expert in remote viewing, so he really walks the talk. And tonight, we are going to be talking about plasma. We're going to be talking about orbs. We're going to be talking about UFOs and new states of matter. So I'm going to bring him up now. Simeon, thanks so much
Wow.
for being with us tonight.
Hi, Zenka. Thanks for having me back tonight. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, excellent. So we also have Standing Bear joining us tonight, who's going to come on a little bit later and talk about his experiences with big people and the phenomenon, which you so eloquently talk about in your books, your website, Crystal Mind, and also in everything that you do,
Well,
your
thanks. Yeah.
YouTube channel and beyond. So I first wanted to talk to you about this fourth state of matter and the fifth state now. So we've
Yeah.
got
Right.
plasma, and we also
Right.
have Microsoft creating a quantum computer that
Right.
is creating what they say is another state of matter. So why don't you talk to people about this? And this is going to inform us as to how these UFOs can appear possibly. So
Right. Well, thanks, Zenka. That's a bunch of topics to talk about. Yeah. No, there are other states of matter that we're not really that familiar with. I think those of us ordinary people don't really think about plasmas, as you said, the fourth state of matter. Plasmas, Zenka, are the most abundant state of matter in the universe by a long shot. Like it's like more than 99% of our universe as we know it are these electrified gases. These are ordinary gases that have been stripped of their electrons, so now they have a charge. We all see these all the time every time we look out into the universe and see nebulas and distant luminous objects, aurora borealis. Lightning is a plasma. We've all seen that. Fluorescent light tubes invented by our friend Nikola Tesla are plasmas. So we're around these plasmas. We're familiar with their ability to glow, to give off light, and to move around, to be electromagnetically active, just like the aurora borealis is, in our atmospheres that we see from time to time. And it's really interesting, isn't it? These auroras have come farther and farther south. You kind of wonder, does it mean something? Usually you have to be pretty far up in the northern hemisphere to see the auroras. And recently, people have seen them all over the United States coming into lower uh, latitudes. So that's something that we're familiar with. But the really fascinating thing that I learned is that plasmas can form the fifth state of matter, which is coherent matter. They can form states beyond the ordinary plasma states that we've seen and that we're familiar with, even if it's from space telescope pictures and so forth of these distant nebulas. There's even debate whether stars are types of plasmas too, not some sort of uh, just continuing nuclear fusion, as we've been told, but whether they represent a type of coherent matter too, which would be related to plasmas. But coherent matter is really what's been fascinating me for the past couple of years, because coherent matter are particles that are at the same frequency and temperature. We call them monochromatic. And that means they have a type of quantum interaction where they are entangled with each other and you get some of these quantum effects kicking in that you normally don't see with your eyes with ordinary matter. Coherent matter, uh, because the particles have been confined in some way, or they've been compressed, as we find in low energy nuclear reaction. And it was very interesting that there was a pair of Israeli scientists that came out just a couple of weeks ago that said they believe cold fusion LENR is operating in the Earth's crust, creating these heavy elements, which we don't have much of an explanation of how they form. They don't seem to be coming from interstellar dust like we've been told. You don't find that in the interstellar dust experiments from satellites and so forth. So you have ordinary scientists now recognizing that this coherent matter process, which we think cold fusion LENR reactions are through microball lightning, is literally transmuting elements in our crust, lighter elements into heavier elements, and producing new types of chemistry that we normally wouldn't see without a fusion reaction. That it's happening around us. So Zenka, that always leads those of us who study these very interesting topics that we're about to talk about tonight. Is this sort of cold fusion LENR process responsible for creating biological organisms with extraordinary abilities and properties that witnesses have been reporting for hundreds of years, including Native Americans, indigenous peoples like we have Standing Bear on tonight? It's part of their legends. They know it's true. Is this what we've been seeing this whole time? Which would mean instead of pushing these witnesses away and just saying, oh, you saw a bear, you saw a pack of wild dogs, or whatever the usual very kind of uh, kind of dis, kind of uh, explanation that's given to kind of push these witnesses away and just make it something ordinary, like saying swamp gas for UFOs or something, or flocks of geese, that type of just so explanation. Perhaps what people have been seeing for all of this time are extraordinary life forms that have special abilities because they're using this natural cold fusion, low energy nuclear reaction process, which, look, if you look on YouTube, if you look at science journals, I've been reading this magazine for 30 freaking years, ever since graduate school, is it coming around to mainstream science is accepting that we do have extraordinary physics going on in just our ordinary world, and this is producing these cloaking effects, these kind of ability of some of these creatures to teleport, to use mental telepathy, which so many witnesses report of this mind speak of these creatures' ability to talk right into their minds. I've talked to people that have experienced this, and Zenka, it's how many witnesses do we need to come forward to talk about the same sort of weird quantum effects over and over again before we stop trying to explain it away as something that's kind of typical and ordinary? Except, yes, these witnesses are telling us what they've experienced. Let's look at the science, that's going to explain it.
Yeah, it's so fascinating. And we're going to break this down for you. But basically, something that has been very key in understanding UFOs and how this dimensional popping into a dimension, right, work is how the resonance works. And that's interesting because you've named your research with that name.
Yeah.
And if we can describe it as these particles, right, that are connected through plasma, and
Right.
in one instant, an entire system can go whoop, and it can become something
Yes.
or pull itself together. And this is so interesting because you're implying in your research and in your talks that that these beings and ships can actually pull energy from the air itself, and that is
Right.
what they use to do their cloaking and their superpowers, right? How does that work?
Right.
How do they get the energy from the air?
So the research into structured water, what's been called charge clustered water, easy water. The people that research this have given it different names, but it was been proposed for hundreds of years, and it's been considered something that mainstream science doesn't want to look at. perhaps it has connections to other types of topics like homeopathy or something that mainstream science doesn't really want to look at. But the research from Gerald Pollack and other researchers into structured water. He's a researcher at University of Washington, Seattle. And I heard him lecture, by the way, Zenka, in 2015 at one of these SSE conferences, Society for Scientific Exploration, which looks at scientific anomalies and wants to take them seriously and look at the science and so forth, all the way, from topics like this to RV to UFOs and so forth. I mean, it was started by Peter Sturrock and other UFO researchers back, I think way back in the late 80s, to give a place for scientists who are interested in these topics to actually present them in meetings and so forth. Pollack told us about this other state of water, and it really caught my attention even back in 2015, is he said that water, when it's in this structured state between liquid and solid, it's sort of in this fractal state between solid and liquid, has the ability to self-organize and have all of these really interesting properties, including the ability of objects and biological organisms that are making use of structured water to absorb ambient energy from their environment so they charge like a battery. Literally the ability of living things to charge electrically from the infrared, just random heat floating around in their environment. And this would explain, according to Pollack, why you have these deep sea creatures where there's really cold temperatures. What is the energy that's sustaining them in the total absence of light? Given that they're not really eating anything, where are they getting their energy from? And conventional science says it's some sort of chemosynthesis. Maybe they're absorbing nutrients from volcanic vents or something like that. But the other possible explanation would be they're literally absorbing heat from their environment and converting that into energy that they can use. And I think what you're referring to is one of these videos I put up not too long ago on my YouTube channel. I think it was one of the most recent ones, where I said perhaps this is how some of these cryptids, perhaps even Bigfoot, are able to generate such huge amounts of energy, is they're converting ambient energy in their environment into a usable form of electricity or energy in their bodies. I think it's something, Zenka, that we've all been interested for a long time, just in the topic of free energy devices that would be in our home somewhere, perhaps a little cube sitting there somewhere that would just generate usable energy from the environment for us to use that would be non-polluting. This is an idea that we've all had for decades now, and people have been researching it and so forth. I think there's evidence that it can exist, at least for temporary amounts of time. But wouldn't it be interesting if nature was already doing this in living biological entities? And if these creatures did exist that could already process energy the way Gerald Pollack and others are doing through a type of structured water, it's called the fourth phase of water. Just like we're talking about plasma is the fourth phase of general matter. The fourth phase of water is this sort of structured form where these hexagonal sheets are stacked on each other. And it gives water the ability to, act electromagnetically. In essence, this is kind of heresy to ordinary science, which just sees water as this kind of neutral element. What we're saying here is water is not a completely neutral inert element. It has electromagnetic properties. If there were organisms and biological creatures that could use water in this way, wouldn't they have abilities that you and I normally don't express or just don't even know we have? And that this would explain some of their just vast athletic strength that seems to go beyond the normal range of what you would consider, normal animal muscles to be able to do, just to run at highway speeds, to jump. I've talked to witnesses that have seen them jump 30 feet in the air. It's the most astounding thing. I'm going to have some of them on my YouTube channel. And just run over rocky, difficult areas with stumps that people can barely walk over, and these creatures almost seem like they're floating over the ground. I'm just to keep it short here, I think this may be one explanation of how Bigfoot and other types of cryptids, even some of the ones that fly, thunderbirds and so forth, that's maybe what's giving them some of their extraordinary energetic abilities, even what people say seemingly they're not even using their wings to flap. They're literally sort of floating. The reason I'm interested in this, Zenka, is it allows us to change this whole topic from something where it's seen as something marginal and pseudoscience to have some scientific principles that would explain some of that. And all of a sudden, we can take thousands and thousands of witness stories, plus all the legend and the stories we have of indigenous peoples encounters here in North America, instead of pushing that away and just say it's just some sort of myth, it's just some sort of, literally just a legend. Then all of a sudden we can look at it and say, hey, if we looked at it from that point of view, this would explain what people have encountered. And now we're off into a whole new area of science, which is really be much more exciting than pushing people away and marginalizing them and making them afraid to come forward to say what they've seen.
Yeah, exactly. Now, for all those that are attempting to grasp this concept of how an organism, whether it be a craft or a cryptoid or whatever, can basically pull things from the air, right? I saw a lot of pictures that you had, and Dan Winters also talks about this because fractality is important to understand as we wrap our mind around the science.
Yes.
Fractality talks about this idea that you can have one small seed of something and it can ripple out into the fractality of it, right? And that gives it its well, I guess what I'm saying is that some of these things that you've observed in nature, right? These animals have wings or little things that can work with the electromagnetic fields, and this is
Right.
what your body does when you remote view or when you make ET
Right.
contact, guys. So
Right.
you are basically imploding the fractality of it, and you're accessing maybe the energy or maybe the resonance, right,
Yeah.
of the
Yeah.
field. And that's how we levitate, as you mentioned.
Right. Right.
This is
Right.
how it works.
Yeah.
Whoops. Hold on 1 second. Oh.
It would take a couple hours to explain all the details, talking about insect wings, that Russian researcher Grubinikov, who believed that bees and other types of insects, beetles, were actually propelling themselves not through aerodynamics, but through a type of electrostatic levitation. And he believed that the fine structured fractal structure of their hairs on their wings and so forth. And Grubinikov, I've been looking over his writings, it's available on the internet, his book. And he spent so much time out in the field where he lived in Russia, literally in the fields, studying insects and so forth, and noticing how his body felt different around beehives and so forth. And he proposed that there's some sort of electrostatic propulsion, like we're told is used on the B-1B bomber along the leading edge of the wings, to give it an extra little bit of boost there. So what we're talking about is electromagnetic properties based on fractal structures, just like you're saying, altering the electromagnetic fields to give biological organisms like insects, like cryptids, this ability to glide and slide over surfaces, not through aerodynamics, not through the shape of their wings or so forth, like that, but through some sort of electrostatic repulsion, propulsion, and so forth. For people who are wondering what fractals are, you're around them all the time. It's clouds, it's trees, it's mountain ranges, it's rivers. It's anything that is self-similar, scale invariant, as we would say in mathematics, that looks the same at a very large scale or at a very small scale, that you're going to see a same sort of wiggly fractured shape. We can measure fractal objects very accurately with something called the fractal dimension. And this is something that I studied in my PhD, in my dissertation in sociology, is looking at processes through fractal dimensions, measuring that dimension, rather than just making everything fit a line, which is where statistics was at when I was getting my graduate work done in the 80s and 90s. And a lot of people have been more recently critical of this idea of making everything fit regular Euclidean shapes or fit onto a regression line, because what that is doing is forcing everything to fit into an average, this sort of this idea we have of normalcy, that everything should sort of fit around a mean or an average with a standard deviation. What that leads us to do, Zenka, is discard topics that are nonlinear, that don't easily fit onto. I mean, there's certain things that we can think of that are very linear, like the gas mileage in your car and your engine, things like that work with that sort of statistics. But when you're talking about living things that are self-organizing, what we say in science, far from equilibrium thermodynamically, like the structured water we were talking about a few minutes ago, far from equilibrium structures can absorb energy and create self-organization. They don't work according to linear processes. We're all familiar with this from the COVID virus from a few years ago. Whatever you think the origins of that are, the ability of something that just starts out really small, right, all of a sudden becomes an epidemic, like chaos theory. That's what it says. Small changes have a big effect. Those sorts of processes are not good for modeling with linear regression lines. So we need to let that type of statistics go. It was created by guys that had this certain idea of normalcy, which a lot of us question nowadays. People are even questioning it decades ago, modeling your whole idea of reality on sort of one central average idea. And when we look at the processes that those of us who watch this sort of podcast or show your viewers, and what we're talking about here, things like remote viewing and UFOs and paranormal phenomena, are much more easy to understand if we think about fractals, because fractals literally are objects between dimensions. And even when I read this back in graduate school, Zenka, before I was studying these sorts of topics, it defined fractals as objects between dimensions, like objects that are more than a two-dimensional surface on a table, but less than a three-dimensional solid object. Clouds, for example, have a fractal dimension 2.2, 2.3, and we can assign fractal dimensions to coastlines since they have a lot of little variation. The closer you look at a coastline, the more little indentations and various changes you see at smaller and smaller scales. So those sorts of real world things, processes and objects, are much more closer to fractals than they are to lines. And it seems that when we're looking at these sorts of processes, fractals tell us that we're going to have various types of non-ordinary electromagnetic phenomena. Yeah, I'm talking about the stuff we're interested here, orbs, ball lightning, the various types of life forms that seem to be associated with orbs and ball lightning. It's like a continuum of phenomena here. Those types of processes seem to be modeled around fractal vortex structures. And I found it very interesting, Zenka, reading through Gerald Pollack's book, The Fourth Phase of Water, that he has a whole section on vortex structures and how they seem to violate the ordinary rules of physics because they're self-organizing. We're talking things like tornadoes and structures like that. We all know, if we've seen tornadoes, been around them, talked to people who have been in tornadoes, or even look at the footage, they seem to be doing something which is well beyond the range of normal aerodynamics and thermodynamics, which have been used to explain what they do. But if you look at the tremendous force of tornadoes and the electromagnetic effects, it's pretty clear that there's something more going on. And Gerald Pollack talks about this. So this idea of a self-organizing structure around a vortex with a fractal framework, the fractal framework would mean it never resolves into a 3D object. The closer you look, the more vortices you would see. We're talking about objects like this. Some people have proposed that perhaps particles are more based on this vortex structure than being just little balls like you and I were taught in high school, little balls orbiting another couple of balls like a solar system model, that it's actually more like a vortex, fractal vortex-like structure. So when we look at it that way, like these donuts within donuts, just sort of visualize it that way, donuts made of more donuts. This is what a lot of researchers, from Russian researchers back in the 80s and 90s to researchers looking at cold fusion LENR right now, like people associated with the Martin Fleisch Memorial Project, which has a lot of YouTube channels, videos on their YouTube channel. This sort of model seems to be closer to the way reality works than the older approaches that we looked at. So it's not surprising that we're going to have different types of electromagnetic processes going on, extended electromagnetics or fractal electromagnetics that kind of compresses in on itself and gets smaller and smaller, all the way down to the 0 point field. Some of these structures, Zenka, might actually literally be tapping into what we call the 0 point energy through fractal structures. And that's why it matters so much.
Yeah, that is so interesting because when we look at this, remember, sometimes in nature we can see the so above as below, right? So if our
Right.
heart is it's a vortex,
Vortex
right?
fractal structure.
A
Yes.
fractal pumping thing. And so
Yeah.
when, one of the themes that we're really excited about in LightNet right now is helping people create have their dreams come true.
Right.
And we
Right.
do this through group coherence, and it works. So when you can, for example, when your heart and your head work together, all of a sudden it's like orchestra, heart math, an orchestra of like healing goes through your body. Same thing when two people, right,
Yeah.
exchange that coherence, it propagates at a different level. And so this is just really exciting. It's exciting that you can pull energy from the air. It means we don't have to fuel up when we go in our UFOs and stuff like that. It's very cool. And it means, and I've always been told this from just a philosophical point of view. When I went to the mystery school, they were like, "Oh yeah, you have all the energy that you need just by tapping in to the center of their earth." They were like ground. So that's why a lot of people ground before they do the ET contact and see the UFOs, because you're basically cohering with the larger structure, borrowing the energy from it, and then you're able to expand that and use that to create realities, right? Adam had a question though here for you.
Yeah, I wondered if we could speculate for a minute about what's going on with the water. And just as you were talking, I had this thought that water kind of has this unique feature to it that it spends time in its current state. I'm gonna drink some, and then I'm gonna be 70% composed of it.
Mm-hmm.
And during that time, it's alive with me.
Right.
Then it's gonna pass through, and I think it's fair to say most of the water in the world has spent time being alive.
Right. Right.
And so I just wondered if you wouldn't mind speculating on what kind of influence that might be having in these phenomenon we see.
No, that's a very interesting question. Adam, is that it? Yeah,
Yes.
because I was just reading about that this afternoon in these papers by Pavel Asmira, who's a Czech researcher, and it was all about fractal vortex structures and water. And he was proposing sort of the idea what you're saying is that water, when it usually moves around the earth in streams and over surfaces, at least fresh water, right, around rocks. Of course, the seawater is always moving around, but we don't drink that directly. Somehow, when it goes to all these piping structures that we have in modern plumbing, it may lose some of that natural charge that it has because it's being confined to a straight line, right? Away from all these vortex type structures it's going to encounter. You look at water flowing in streams, right? You see these mini vortices. It's fun just to watch them in streams and so forth. I think the reason we're so fascinated by that is because it's literally generating charge clusters. And so it's really the question is there a way for us to live that we can absorb more of that natural energy, which the universe seems to be creating through moving water over surfaces, even groundwater and so forth. And, to respond to your comments, and I mean, the idea of absorbing energy comes from a lot of different Eastern practices that talk about chi, right? Chi energy, uh, creating chi energy. And what we know from this type of research is that it seems to attract more of itself. I mean, like negative chi energy seems to attract more negative energy, right? And we can even feel that around people sometimes, can't we? And that sort of positive chi energy, and this is something I've practiced. I mean, I've studied Qigong and Tai Chi long before I was interested in these topics. And it often makes me wonder if there's a connection, like if some of these creatures we're talking about here are sort of naturally oriented to do this. But other ways, vortices and certain patterns and certain motions seem to allow us to absorb chi energy from our environment. And you start to wonder whether that's something that our bodies could transmute even into other types of energy that have a kind of a direct biological value for us. So it raises a lot of interesting questions, and I think that the water has a lot to do with this, and we haven't researched it. I'm afraid we haven't researched a lot of these topics in science. I'm hoping that I'm really convinced actually it's going to be changing soon. Even in Science Magazine, just a couple weeks ago, a friend sent me an article, and from Science Magazine, I had missed it because I didn't have my editions in front of me. It was about charge clusters forming from water droplets. Just Adam, just sort of like what you're saying, they found that water that is sort of atomized through motion, atomized into little droplets and little particles in the air, naturally forms positive and negative charges on different droplets. And that's called charge separation. And charge separation, Zanka, is the beginning of coherent matter. It says it right in the Lockheed Martin patent about generating coherent matter wave beams, which Lockheed asked for the patent office for a patent in just a couple of years ago. And you read through that patent application, I mean, they really explain a lot to us. It's really understandable. You read what they're saying there. They're talking about using charge separation to create a fifth state of matter, this coherent state of matter where the particles are at the same frequency and temperature, which means they're communicating with each other. You've generated quantum entanglement. You mentioned the Microsoft supercomputers and so forth at the beginning of the show. That there's a way to do this with a sort of, they were kind of talking about a process to generate all these particles. But the real impact there is they said in this patent they could create this coherent matter not just with ordinary particles we're used to, like electrons, but they could also do it with photons or any other type of particle that they could get their hands on. They could turn them into a mass of coherent matter, which means you could generate ball lightning, orbs, propulsion systems. They mention these things right in the patent application. You know, if you presented this in an ordinary science conference, you'd be accused of doing pseudoscience. But here, one of our largest defense contractors in the world is asking for a patent in teleportation, cloaking, invisibility, directed energy, all these topics that any of us interested in this, in the types of subjects that, you know, are part of your show and many other podcasts, we look at, we call it paranormal, but somehow when it's part of a defense, you know, company's application for a patent, it's not called paranormal anymore. What anymore is it? It's just called future, you know, advanced research science. It's given some fancy name. And this is the UFO connection there, Zenko. We know that these same agencies, defense contractors, government agencies within the Pentagon, we've heard about ATIP, we've heard about OSAP, right? We have that book, Skinwalkers at the Pentagon by James Lukatsky. You know, a missile analyst who works for the Pentagon is studying cryptids out at Skinwalker Ranch, and he says it's all real. These folks have been studying this without telling us. And they accuse us of doing pseudoscience while they're taking tax dollars to study this in programs at the Pentagon. Yeah, I know these programs were controversial. Some of them were canceled after a while. Depends who the department head was at the time, who was tolerant of what. But, you know, they're spending millions on this, which even, you know, for Pentagon dollars isn't very much. And those of us that study this are accused of doing some sort of fringe science. But when they do it, it's not called fringe science. That is a double standard. That's a double standard. We should not be putting up with this anymore.
I don't think we're going to have to. The
Good.
internet is a buzz right now of the chief technologist at the White House talking about, yeah, we can manipulate space and
There you
time.
go.
Everyone's, you know, so the cat's out of the bag, and
Yeah, and
now we're not.
He did talk about 50 years of suppression
Yeah,
and how
Oh, we did.
he did.
Good.
He said there's been 50 years that the suppression started in the 1970s. It had its purpose at that time, but that purpose is long gone, and it's time we took the lid off that and really re-examined things. And that just happened, I think, today or yesterday.
Yeah.
yeah. So the other thing I wanted to mention before I want to talk a little bit about orbs and things like that is that This, I just ran and got this. This is a water smacker. This is really cool. So this is something that basically puts frequency into your water at Schumann resonance and electrifies your water, right? Then you can vortex your water as you drink it. So your body isn't fighting to cohere and uh, do things with that water because you've given it already done, basically. So it's interesting. So we can apply these things, and I think eventually, we're talking about matter printers and all this technology, but eventually maybe we have to die for this to happen, but eventually we can think about something and create something right in front of us, right? So we're
Right.
able to manipulate the particles in the field to be this new state of matter. Now, Microsoft has developed a quantum computer, and as you mentioned, Simeon, it's not zeros and ones; it's both possibilities at the same time. And
Yes, yes.
they believe that they created another state of matter. Now it's
They said that
entirely
in their press
of
release. I was
matter.
very excited about that, Zenka.
Right? And it's
I
interesting they use the word matter. So basically, they're saying that they can program, right, the field to create things. And this is what we do every day. Your thoughts,
right.
feelings, and emotions create
Yes.
everything around you. So talk about what Microsoft is doing. I want to get into Orbs, then we're going to bring on Standing Bear, but go ahead.
Yeah,
Let's talk
so I
about
mean,
these quantum computers.
so
The Yeah.
be- I have run into these researchers studying quantum computers here in Boulder, Colorado. And what I learned from them is that there are all these different strategies for creating a quantum computer. You have to have particles that are entangled with each other. And these particles are in this superposition when they're not in ordinary matter state. In this superposition, which quantum physicists have been talking about ever since, the beginning of the last century, uh, Erwin Schrödinger and others, and these huge debates about matter versus particles and so forth. In the superposition state, in this wave state, um, some of these quantum computing companies have even named themselves after this wave state. There's one called D-Wave from Canada. This superposition wave state, we are told that the particle is in all positions at once. It's neither ones nor zeros, positive or negative. It's in the state of all possibilities. That's what quantum mechanics tells us. It's in the state of all possibilities. And when you bring, this is the challenge, a group of these particles together, 20 particles, 50, 100, or in the case of this Microsoft uh, idea that they have this technology, which, it's still being developed. They actually literally haven't achieved this, but they feel that they're close to achieving it. I believe it's millions of particles at the same time. These particles are all in a superposition, which means they're in every possible state simultaneously. They are not fixed like in our room around us with particular frequencies, which are going to give them a color or solidity, whether they're liquid or solid or soft or hard. Those particles have dropped out of superposition and are in kind of a particle state that we're familiar with. But particles can be in the superposition state. Zenka, this goes off into the whole discussion of parallel realities and multiverses. And people like David Deutsch, the physicist David Deutsch from the UK, has said that if quantum computing is possible, it proves the existence of the multiverse. Because where are these particles when they're not in our reality, when they're in every possible state simultaneously coherent, like you're saying, as a group? They have to be in this multiverse state. And people since Hewitt Everett in 1957 at Princeton, Hugh Everett III proposed this idea, he called it relative states. There's always been this state about parallel realities and multiverses, but quantum computing pushes us closer to the idea that it's actually a reality. At least that's David Deutsch's interpretation and mine also. Because where are these particles when they're doing their computation? Now, the challenge for quantum computing has always been decoherence. Decoherence is the state that we normally see matter in. It's not the coherent matter state that we're talking about, that fifth state of matter. It's this more ordinary state of solid or liquid or gas or something like that. That's decoherence, where the particles have sort of dropped out of this superposition and are in kind of a ordinary fixed state. And the challenge, Zenko, with quantum computing is that, and I'm told this by people that have worked around here in the Boulder area on these projects, is that these particles want to cohere with everything around them, the wall of the little reactor they're in, other particles, and then they decohere and they drop out of this quantum superposition state. And then you get errors. So the challenge for quantum computing has always been, can you create this state of several million particles in this coherent state together, computing something at this incredible speed because they're in a superposition. They're neither zero or ones. They can be both at the same time. How do you keep them going without decohering, and then the computing stops or it creates errors and you have to have some sort of error correction method? So the Microsoft method was to use these anyon particles. Anyons are these particles that are both a particle and an antimatter particle at the same time. They were proposed by this young Italian scientist, Majorana, I believe back in the 30s, and that there could be particles that are their own antiparticles simultaneously. And Microsoft is using that idea. It's called Majorana zero modes for their quantum computing because they believe that it's less error prone and that these particles have a clear path of how they're evolving. It's called abelian versus non-abelian. We're used to a world where 2 + 2 = 4, right? And you can go backwards from 4 to 2 + 2 or forwards again, right? In the quantum world, it's called non-abelian. It's not commutative like that. I mean, this is something we all learned in math, commutation. It actually isn't commutative. So the direction that things go in are not reversible again. And that's useful in computing because it gives you this clear line of how the particles are doing what they do. So this sort of property of quantum mechanics where the same 2 + 2s don't always equal 4 in the same way, that it's like a one-time reaction. You can't go back the other way to the numbers, which normally it works that way in the math you and I were taught in grade school. It works differently in it's kind of called like this braiding, where the braids, you can actually demonstrate this with physical objects. You could turn it one way and then another way, and it's not quite the same as turning it this way and this way. And that's what they're working with at Microsoft. And so they're excited about the idea that they could have this sooner. I'm told quantum computing is still quite a ways away because of this decoherence problem. But I'm glad you're bringing it up because, it relates back to this whole discussion of coherent matter, the Lockheed Martin patent, and are there life forms that are already able to exhibit these quantum coherent effects? And is that what we've been calling paranormal all these years? Is it really something that's a quantum effect? I mean, and not in a metaphysical way. I'm not just talking like some sort of philosophy here. I'm talking about actual real processes, particles working together in coherence that are able to do things just like a quantum computer can do. That ordinary matter seems kind of slow and dumb compared to this matter. It can move really quickly. It can teleport. It can become invisible. It can look like something else because the particles can just all shift as a group. And that's a very exciting idea. And I am certain that we're already capable of doing this, whether it's through some sort of technique like you're mentioning, like visualization. This is something I've taught in one of the courses that I've taught to my people interested in my platform that I called Human Fusion, which is using this idea of visualization to believe that you're actually seeing parallel realities in your own future, and you can actually orient yourself to some of those realities by actually using RV and your own imagination to see them very specifically and see what you're doing in those realities, and then work backward from that to now to see how you could accomplish it. I mean, people that I've worked with who've used these techniques say they really work. And it's sort of like this idea of quantum computing. So I'm wondering whether a lot of this technology, Senka, which we're excited to discover, make big headlines, are something that nature is already doing. For some reason, a lot of us were dumbed down by society, by our school systems. I'm not trying to blame anyone, but that we forgot we could do this. And we read in ancient texts of people being able to fly on magic carpets and so forth. Maybe they really were able to do that. It's not just a story, you know? That's what I think. And we forgot. We forgot how to do all that. It would be kind of a shock to our egos to think that we devolved, but it seems that's could be very well what
We
happened,
just
right? And
forgot.
all of a sudden, this world we're discovering again seems, oh my God, strange creatures and things that can go invisible. I've talked to people that tell me they've seen Bigfoot go invisible. I just spoke to someone a month ago when I gave a lecture in Troy, Idaho. She came up to me before the talk and she said, both my husband and I saw it turn into this sort of shimmering glows like pixels of light. She said, just like you talked about in some of your lectures, we saw it in our backyard. And we went up to this thing and it was just a kind of a predator type image on the tree, you know, kind of shimmering outline. She said, my husband said, don't touch it. You know, we don't know. They said before their eyes, it just turned into this. So I've spoken to so many people that have seen this. I think we should be looking for what the science behind this is instead of marginalizing these people and saying, oh, you know, you were hallucinating, you saw a bear, blah, blah, blah. When they really saw something that we know, it's called coherent matter. It creates ball lightning, micro ball lightning, cold fusion. I mean, you know, Zenka, this is all going to come together in a really big way. It's the rubber band effect. The longer that it's been in the dark and we've been told, oh, don't talk about it, you're going to be seen as a weirdo. No one's going to like you. You won't get a good job. The types of things I normally hear when people give excuses for not sharing their stories. It's going to snap in the other direction because you can see it's all interlinked. Just in our conversation tonight, look how many cool topics we've covered in a very natural way. It's an indication that there's another paradigm waiting out there for us that we're venturing into. And if Microsoft is talking about inventing other states of matter, well, the rest of us can talk about it too. We can talk about it too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wonder in along that topic if the fractal geometries that you've talked about would be a more accurate way eventually, and we could evolve into this to do the math to describe
Yeah.
quantum states because like you're saying, I mean, we're really going for the most rudimentary when we want a one or a zero out of it because it can go up, down, side, it can point in any direction, and it does. And so it seems possibly like there would be a multi-dimensional or
Right.
three-dimensional fractal geometry that would be a lot more coherent in describing these things and being able to communicate with it.
Right. No, I think that's really true, Adam. And you look at the researchers now that are working on some of the same challenges we're talking about right now, and they've come up with these fractal vortex structures as the explanation. Several of them have come up with this independently, working independently of each other, and have come to the same sort of model in their mind. So that sort of reality is a little different than the reality we've been taught about, where we think we see solid objects around us that are physical and they're there and they're just sitting there. Fractal objects never quite resolve into being solid because there's always smaller structures, just like a coastline, just like a cloud. You know, even Zenka, as you're talking about in our own bodies, the heart has that fractal sort of structure. The cardiovascular system in the human body is a fractal structure because it starts with these larger organs like the heart and arteries and keeps branching off into capillaries and things like that that go down to feed each little
Yeah.
tiny cell in there with the oxygen and nutrients that it needs, right? So we're already walking fractals that are branching structures. Our lung structures too, right? The lung, you keep looking at it, keeps branching off into smaller and smaller structures because it wants to feed all this oxygen that it takes in at the main branch here into the rest of the body. Our inner ear is shaped like that vortex type of structure. So the more you look in nature, Adam, you actually see that it works this way. What these physicists and engineers are proposing is that's actually the basic structure of electromagnetism,
Yes.
is that the toroid has a deeper fractal structure. The Soviet Russian researchers, and I have to say they were ahead of us by several decades on this, if we're even catching up at all, called it an electromagnetic phantom. That's their words for it. When they were looking at some of these classified experiments in the Soviet Union with ball lightning electromagnetism and coils, they were looking at experiments that had coils uh, around coils around coils. You kind of can imagine a superstructured donut with multiple levels of coils. They found that that could produce long-lived electromagnetic coherent structures that persisted in the lab after they turned the machinery off. It was there for several days. They could keep measuring this coherent electromagnetic structure, and they weren't sure what they were looking at. They just called it a fractal bagel. Another word is electromagnetic phantom. So you can kind of see how you can go from fractals to ghosts that way. They didn't literally mean ghosts like we talk about it, but that's what they called it, a phantom. And you sort of begin to wonder, is that what we're dealing with here with these variety of paranormal phenomena? Is they're based on a fractal type of electromagnetic geometry, which allows them to persist without a kind of a direct energy source, which we have from our mitochondria and so forth, right? It could be like an energy form that exists without a physical structure. And isn't this what people see out in your neck of the woods and other places when they see orbs or ball lightning? And there's a continuum of what is what, but it's kind of the same range of phenomena. And the ball lightning, just one more thing to add in here, it has a fractal state where it gets smaller and smaller and smaller, mini vortices and mini. And that's what we believe cold fusion lunar is. This is what these researchers were talking about. Takeaki Matsumoto, the Japanese researcher, Ed Lewis, and others who were looking into this reached the conclusion that what we call cold fusion, low energy nuclear reaction, is actually micro ball lightning moving around metals and different structures that liberates a lot of energy from the coherency.
Amazing, amazing. It's interesting because I was trying to understand fractals and why people see them when they do these crazy DMT things, and we were actually looking at someone's like CG of it last night on
Yeah.
the and it was interesting because it showed like a simple street, and then all of a sudden things like started to show the fractality of it. And it was almost like these pools of fractals that held certain coherences, like maybe an object holds that coherence, but maybe things are more malleable than we
Yes,
imagine,
exactly.
like our lives are. Now, I want to just take a pause here because
Yeah.
I want people to find you. I want people to support your research. You can find Simeon Hein at his YouTube channel, Fractal Friend. You can
Yeah.
also go to newcrystalmind.com for his blog, his courses, things like that. And
Yeah, my books are available too. They're on New.
cool.
I mean, I'm happy to sign them for people. Send signed copies.
Nice, nice. And you also have a Patreon, which is Dark Matter Mysteries. So
Yes.
this is a great way, everyone listening, to support someone's research by lending your money to this understanding. Now, we're also going to be bringing on Standing Bear,
Please do.
who saw cryptids, as you mentioned. Well, I won't ruin it, but
Let
okay.
him. Yeah, I'm
But I
curious to
want
hear.
to ask you one more question
Yeah.
before we go into that, and that is orbs. Are
Yeah.
orbs shadows from other dimensions? Are they remnants from, like, are they ships? Are they beings? Like, I don't get it. Tell me
I,
what you know, and then we're gonna go to Standing Bear.
I was just going to show you a picture from Dark Matter Monsters, my most recent book, about ball lightning and cryptids and Bigfoot. I mean, this is what you're saying is what Ken Shoulders, one of the researchers in the U.S., believed. He was looking at these different types of structures. Winston Bostic from the 50s, same sort of thing. And we're talking, these are in test tubes. These are tiny little structures. And they seem to be based on this type of fractal toroidal geometry, kind of fractal donuts, rings within rings. I just wanted to show a picture in case people have trouble visualizing what a fractal is, as it just keeps repeating but at smaller scales, bigger scales. It never resolves to a line. That's the main point. So the orbs are a lot of different things. And those of us involved in this research talk about, is this a parallel reality coming into our reality? Ken Shoulders, the researcher, worked with Hal Puthoff, also at SRI, where remote viewing was developed, as you're aware. Shoulders, who developed a lot of this research into ball lightning and micro ball lightning, argued that there was a dark form of orbs and ball lightning that were essentially decoupled from our physical reality. And he said it's extremely strange because they have different physics constants, permittivity, permeability are different. And so here's the thing, Zank. I'm attempting to answer your question. He said they're actually around us and you won't see them because they're decoupled from our normal interaction with physical reality. They could shift back into our space and become ordinary orbs and ball lightning or micro ball lightning that we would see with our eyes. But they have a dark state, and he suggested that this is what dark matter might be, is these other states of orbs and ball lightning that have just different constants that make up what matter is, so that they're decoupled from us, so we actually literally don't see them. And he called it dark ball lightning. And even in the Lukatsky book, Skinwalkers at the Pentagon, they talk about these dark shapes they came across. Of course, Bigfoot experiencers, witnesses often describe how they're darker than the background at night. They look literally like a dark mass, like dark matter. I mean, this is where the ideas come from. So these orbs, Zenka, because they're in a coherent matter state, that's what I think they are based on the research I've done, reading all these different sources about ball lightning and orbs and so forth. This coherent, the particles are very closely aligned with each other frequency-wise. That they can form many different states, and they interact with these life forms that are more in that direction. So it's the way I see it as like a type of a spectrum of life forms, and it branches out from the physical that we're used to into an invisible realm. If that invisible realm even turns into parallel realities, I wouldn't be surprised one bit. But it seems like it's actually part of our reality, but we don't see it in our reality. Just at the first step, even before we go to parallel realities, there's types of energy and life forms around us ordinarily that normally don't interact with us very much, like dark matter, in the same sort of mysterious sense that it's there, but it doesn't interact directly, just has a slight gravitational pressure. I think that's what the evidence suggests, and it's backed up by people like Ken Shoulders, Takeaki Matsumoto, the Japanese researcher. They're all proposing the same sort of thing, and it all goes back to these sort of fractal electromagnetic structures. Some people call it extended electromagnetism, another type of Maxwellian field, closed Maxwellian pointing vectors and so forth. I mean, James Clerk Maxwell studied this, but his model was just magnetic and electric fields at right angles in a very ordinary, repeated way. These researchers are suggesting there's other solutions to Maxwell's equations that produce fractals. And from there, you get coherency, you get orbs, coherent matter, and in my view, life forms. And I would say, to answer your question directly, that is still part of our reality. We may not understand it very well, but that isn't necessarily a parallel reality. It might lead in that direction, but it's these parallel realities, I would say, are more, when this is for another show, time slips. You've heard about them. You know people who've experienced them. I've talked to people who've experienced this. We know what this is about, and we'll save it for another time. But it's experiencing something, even with a group of friends, that doesn't exist anymore, that disappeared 50 years ago, but you went into that restaurant, you went into that building, you talked to the people, and it's not there anymore. That, to me, is a parallel reality. It's another version of the space-time we're in. But what I think we're talking about here, before we go to Standing Bear, I'm just going to say, you could disagree with me. I think that's part of our reality, like a hidden part of our own reality, not technically a parallel reality.
I concur with you wholeheartedly, because with our radio research here at LightNet and our labs, we know that these beings are using the radios, and we know they can see us, and we know they're here.
Right.
Like they're right here. It's not like off in some ship.
Yeah, they talk through radio
It's right
sometimes. Yeah,
here,
I know
right?
people have yes, right.
It's very, very interesting.
It's very close, isn't it? Very close, but somehow you can't quite see it. You don't know where it's coming from.
Yeah. I want to pause for a minute, ask everyone to drop a like, subscribe. Big shout out to Portal to Ascension, Neil, Alan at New Realities as well. Often people ask us, what is LightNet? So I'm just going to tell you, we study how people do impossible things. That's levitation, bending spoons, talking to ETs, right? All these things, getting out of wheelchairs, finding your purpose, getting off addiction, all these things that seem impossible are not. And we invite people to come to join at ourlightnet.com. We have coaching that can walk you through all of these things. And if you know someone who's levitated or bent a spoon or is a medium, let us know at team@LightNet, and we'd love to research them because we crunch the numbers and figure out what the best way to do this is. So I'm going to bring up Standing Bear right now. He is absolutely incredible. We have interviewed him as well on our show, and he is one of those people who's had these incredible embodied experiences. Being a shaman, he works in the ether, like the other worlds, and he can see and bring them here. And he's done this with ETs. He's done this with Bigfoot, which he calls big people. So I'm going to give you the stage, Standing Bear, and why don't you walk through that experience where you did see the big people. Thank you.
Yeah. Yes. Well, thank you, and thank you, Professor. That was really beautiful and really powerful and really amazing. And thank you for those beautiful words. You use a little different words than we do, but we still speak the same language, and that's absolutely beautiful. One of those. I live here, Fishing Lake First Nation, Saskatchewan, Canada Treaty 4 territory. And just to really jump into the story, I was here about 4 or 5 years ago, and I was walking through the woods. That's what I would do for hours and hours and hours. And I adopted this little puppy. She was homeless. She was a res dog, and I named her Princess. And so we go out on these really long walks. I would take my tobacco and just feel and see the ground. I see the ancestors. I commune with all these beautiful things, with all these beautiful spirits, all the consciousness that's out there. Even the grass. I would talk to the grass. I would talk to the trees. I would talk to all this beautiful consciousness, right? Because they all have a voice. They all have a song. They all have a frequency. They all have a resonance. And when you walk through that, you can't help but feel a part of this. Right? And so I was just crossing this one field. Off in the distance, I saw this huge thing standing there, and it's kind of moose season, kind of rutting season. So I just kind of looked at it and. Didn't pay too much attention, but I stopped and I just gave it the road, right? And I remember looking at it and put my glasses on and looked closer to it. And I remember squaring up on it, and I could see it, and it squared up on me, and I was like, oh, okay. This is not typical moose behavior, right? This is not typical moose behavior. So I don't get nervous that often, and so I said, you know what? I think it's time to do a hasty retreat. I think I'm just going to collect my puppy and go. So I grabbed my little bag of tobacco. I said, look, I come here. I mean no harm. This is your world. This is your world. This is your walk. I do not want to get in the way of that. Go ahead and live your life. We love you. Right? And so this is a part that got me nervous. And so I laid the tobacco down, collected the puppy for about 5 seconds. I looked back, and it was like, poof, gone. and it was in the middle of a big field. There's no way that it can, even at sprinting speed, that it was going to go anywhere. And that was the only time I really got nervous. I said, you know what? I think I'm gonna leave here. So I took the puppy, headed back the same way, and the whole way back, the whole 3 mile trip back, it was paralleling me. That means I knew it was there. The proximity was close. That same feeling that I had when I saw it was still there when I didn't see it. So I could see it but not see it. Know it was. I couldn't even smell it. Even the dog responded, and this cute little princess, little thing. I've never seen her upset, and then the hackles went way up. She was looking in the same direction I was looking at. You know what? It is right there. And our family has a beautiful interaction, a beautiful relationship with the big people. It is on our medicine wheel. It's about speaking. It's about honesty. That's for those of you who don't know, the medicine wheel is how we relate to life, how we step into this life, how we understand life, how we connect to life on a deep conscious level. Right. So when we're honest, they're honest. They live at this beautiful conscious level, this beautiful connection with life, and that is something that we as a people, we're a really poor species. We understand that. You know, you know, um, we have a hard time connecting to those things that give us life. We have a hard time connecting to the water, which is consciousness. We have a hard time connecting to the tree. Trees are consciousness. We have a hard time connecting to the fire. These are all different levels of consciousness. And so when we enter into this spiritual agreement, the ancient ways, these are what the ancients did. And now we are trying to restore the harmony and balance within ourselves. And we can't do that without having a good relationship with orbs. We can't have it without with we would consider ancestors. A good relationship with the water. The water responds to everything that we say. The universe responds to everything we say. It's that collective, collaborative agreement, which is natural law. These are all levels of natural law. Water is natural law. Telling the truth is natural law. Harmony is natural law. Humility is natural law. Once we align with that, and so how do we know that? Well, we take two tuning forks. One on one side of the room, the other on the other side of the room. And you know what? We hit one, the other starts vibrating because that's that collective consciousness. That's that interactive connection. So we live in two worlds, the seen and the unseen. They mirror each other all the time. They have to. That's natural law. We understand that. Well, what we see in the physical world also matches what we see. Yes, sorry.
I'm going to interrupt you a little bit because we are having so much trouble hearing you because of your connection. So it's not clear, but I can just kind of summarize a little bit in case people couldn't hear very well, because he's bringing about a lot of very important points. So he talks about the story where he was walking with his dog, saw something that it felt like a moose, but all of a sudden he knew it was not. When he went to go collect his dog and start walking home, he looked over, he saw the big person, which I think there were two, a big and a smaller one, and he says that he felt that it was his, it basically not was his time to die, but he thought, I'm probably not going to survive this. This is so powerful and out of what I know, and this is so crazy. And he walked parallel back to the reservation, and as he got home, he saw it fade into nothing.
Oh,
Now, he also talks, which was what you were mentioning. Standing Bear is also talking about the consciousness of all things. Now, the ET messages that I get are constantly saying, Zenka, you can't make contact with us if you're not in resonance, right? Your consciousness is not resonant. Like, that's why we're starting to see orbs and things like that, because we're starting to resonate at that level. But when we make that connection, that consciousness connection, that we are in oneness, that kind of starts to unlock things in a different way. And I think that that is the key, these resonance. And Standing Bear talked about a tuning fork, of how his people understand you strike a tuning fork at one side of the room, and at the other side, the other tuning fork will actually make a sound, right? Because it's resonating. So I'm sorry, Standing Bear, that your connection is not good tonight, but we're not able to hear you. So I'm going to bring Simeon back on.
If he turned off the video, we might hear a clear audio. It's just a bandwidth issue.
Yeah, I think so.
I
I
have
don't
a
know
little illustration of the tuning forks in. Thanks for sharing those stories, Standing Bear. That was fascinating. So the resonance is really the basis of all of it. The tuning forks idea that you hit one tuning fork and the other will start spontaneously ringing. Zenka, I mean, just like Standing Bear is saying, that seems to be the basis of a lot of this, and it's mentioned in the Lockheed Martin patent. Just to bring that up again, they talk about this idea of creating resonance amongst a group of particles so they're all interacting at the same frequency. That's what resonance is. When I heard Vittorio Violante, a researcher at Italy's ENA government, huge energy research institute, at one of the SSE meetings, he was talking about their experiments in what we called back then at the time just cold fusion, before it was called LENR, low energy nuclear reaction. And in his talk, he's going through how, it was very challenging to get the reaction going, but it took weeks in some cases to get the reaction going, and putting these particles in a compressed surface, the hydrogen in these palladium rods, and it had to be cracks in the rods. They couldn't be perfect palladium. They needed defects, because you have to have something for the hydrogen particles to compress into, which encourages them to become coherent with the other particles, because they can't move around in any way that they want. And well, anyway, I'm just mentioning this because Standing Bear is talking about resonance, and Vittorio Violante, this top Italian cold fusion researcher, told us categorically it's real. I mean, it may be challenging to get it into a sustainable reaction for weeks, but they definitely got it going for a few days at a time, whereas producing excess heat. That's what we're talking about. More energy is coming out than you're putting in. And he said the basis is resonance. He said it's not a chemical reaction. Don't think about it that way. It's a resonance reaction between the particles, where they kind of keep propelling each other to resonate more, and becomes a feedback loop where more and more energy is being generated until it starts to almost destabilize a little bit, the decoherence, and it just loses the coherency, comes back down. But it can do it for a while. Of course, the trick is, can you get it to sustain for a while in a way that would be like a useful energy source? We hear a lot of people with different devices for decades now proposing that this is the one that would work and so forth. But I think that's what it's very interesting here, isn't it? That what we're talking about is sort of the cutting edge of modern Western science, is something that Standing Bear recognizes in his cultural tradition as something that they already accept as self-evident. That if we lose resonance with our environment, with the water, the other creatures out there, the insects, and the birds and the animals, we're impoverished, because we're disconnected from reality. We're disconnected from nature. We almost think we exist autonomously without anything else around us. And what he's talking about is all these relationships we have with all the other living things around us and the elements, which creates a type of resonance, right? Where you can sort of feel it, and it creates a type of spontaneous understanding. And isn't this what we've lost in many ways in Western civilization, which creates a feeling of isolation, right? Loneliness and disconnection. which we all know people that feel that, and that leads to addictions, right? And all sorts of unhappiness. So I just find it fascinating. We go from this cutting edge of Western all the way to these indigenous traditions, and it's the same sort of message.
Yeah, and this is so ironic because we can see this. So what if this is all some sort of, I guess what I'm saying is this. When we resonate with someone, like we're resonating with you because we geek out on the same things, it's like really exciting, right? That's a resonance. And when you are living your purpose like you are, you're resonating and pulling and attracting in the people that advance your joy and purpose, right? So these people are calling you up to be in these movies, you're getting, writing these books, and all this stuff is happening. So it's kind of like that in a broader sense. When we resonate with space travel and Reiki healing our body, or whatever it is, it all comes into being, right? Because our consciousness is primary, right? And it's a very strong and powerful tool. And it's my understanding that the laws of nature are the same. You can't be like, oh, this works sometimes, this works kind of, this works over there, but not here. Like, I'm always looking for the fundamental laws that are the same, no matter in the fractal, right? How do we understand this? So
Yeah,
again, and just to throw back to Standing Bear, I'm sorry we can't bring him on because the bandwidth issue, especially not with video, is like, he told me, he's like, look, Zenka, when you ask your questions to the water, he's like, do you think the water in your glass is disconnected from all the oceans in the world and all the knowledge that ever was? And I was like, oh, you're right. Because it is. It's entangled in that way. And we are all entangled in a way to everything that is and was, right? So when we use our imagination and when we use our intuition and knowing, we really do create worlds. So if you're a pioneer, which I'm sure you are if you're on this video right now, thank you for creating these worlds, right? Because we do by resonating our consciousness with them. And as we're starting to realize, the sky's the limit, right, of what we can create and what we can experience in this lifetime. And I'm very excited that we're on the cusp of having some of this knowledge, because I want to go around in space and do cool things like that. I want to be in a spaceship. I want to be on a hot air balloon with you, Simeon, and let's go on a spaceship as well.
Yeah.
So we're looking forward to that. So in our closing tonight, Simeon, talk about your dreams for your future. Like, what are you really excited about? What are you excited about knowing? What are you excited about researching in the coming years? And yeah, thanks again for being with us tonight.
Oh yeah, thank you.
And sharing your beautiful life and life's work.
Oh, well, that's a lot of good questions there. Yeah, I guess, to sum it up, we could just say resonance matters because it literally creates matter, right? Yeah, I guess my dream for all of this is to live in a way that's more sustainable and more harmonious with our environment, so we can have our needs met without being destructive to the other life forms that live on the planet, right? So that we can all live together here on this beautiful planet without causing so much anguish and violence and even extermination, extinction of other species, which is a pretty serious thing. I mean, it's such a special place that we have here, our planet Earth. And, we've lived in a way for thousands of years, like Standing Bear's mentioning, that feels like there's never enough, right? Because it feels somehow that there's a type of impoverishment. I think if we can master the principles of resonance, starting with ourselves, we don't even need an external machine. We'll have those at some point, I believe. But it really starts within yourself, within your own life, the way you treat other people, the way you treat things around you, right? that resonance of energy has continuing self-feedback knock-on effects, which are either going to be positive, which are going to be constructive and building more things, or as we're kind of we're seeing with our own country right now, kind of destructive in some ways. And it's not that destabilization is always a bad thing. Systems can self-organize, reorganize in new ways if older structures are kind of broken up a bit. So that's not inherently a bad thing. But uh, we don't need to go back to plastic. I think I would summarize it that way. We don't need to go back to plastic straws, okay, Mr. President? We can find new ways of doing things that satisfy our needs to have straws for drinks. I'm just using this as an analogy without creating tons and tons of microplastic waste, which goes into the oceans, it goes into the animals, it goes into the soil, it goes into the microorganisms, and then it ends up in us with pretty much unknown, unexpected effects that may be pretty negative. So that's really the idea, Zenka. Can we use resonance? As you can see, I like to play guitar. That's a sort of a very beautiful way to work with resonance to create structure and feeling. And I think sometimes when I'm playing, I can really feel a boost of energy that seems like it's coming in from this chi energy, this sort of harder to see dark matter world. It's getting that self-feedback loop going. So I think we can all learn to do this. And even what we're going through right now in our own country, it's just a prompt for us to do a little better, to try a little harder in those directions, to create, positive self-sustaining systems. And I know we can do it. I just want to give you one quick example. You were talking a little bit about PK. It's something I'm fascinated by, psychokinesis, ability of people to project energy with their hands, and mental intent to move objects physically that they're not touching, to bend objects, to melt objects. I've seen demonstrations of this in Japan when I was teaching RV there several times. I know this is real, that humans have the ability to project energy from their hands, whatever the source of that may be. But this was empirically verified, Zenka, at Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research Lab. It was called PEAR. It was run by Brenda Dunn and Bob John at Princeton for 20 years. Had initially defense funding, company McDonnell Douglas sponsored it. They were interested in the mental effects of pilots on planes and stuff, And what they found, which is consistent with what you're saying, is there's a resonance effect between couples that allow them to affect micro PK machines. These are random number generators that generate zeros and ones. They found that humans can affect this random number generator to the amount of about 2 to 3 oscillations per 10,000 of zeros or ones, of the machine just spitting out zeros and ones randomly. That about 2 or 3 of those out of 10,000 random numbers generated will not be random anymore. And you can make the random number generator go towards 1 or 0. And they showed this after 20 years of experiments, I think 375,000 trials, with the odds of like trillions to 1 that this is just by chance. And what they found, I'm just mentioning this here, is like some people like you and Adam there, bonded pairs, that's what they called them, can affect the random number generator more than one person, which suggests a group coherence effect. So if we take that to heart, that would mean that all of us together can generate an exponentially larger positive effect with our minds and our intent and our feelings than the negative forces, which are just linear. You see where it leads is that the positive energy, because of this self-feedback loop, generates increasing levels of organization and structure, which we see throughout nature. And we're part of that. And so we need to be conscious of what we're doing every day, how we're treating our environment, other people, other life forms. And then we can create those positive feedback loops, just like PEAR Labs found, and begin to consciously affect our environment in many different ways that we're probably even unaware of right now. And that will, we start to restore our environment and our world. So this is why I'm optimistic about where we're going. it seemed pretty dark for a long time. And as you mentioned, I've been involved in these studies for just, it's kind of a blink of the eye, but it's, for me, it's, 3 decades. And I found that the progress seemed pretty slow sometimes. I mean, I've been to so many conferences of all types of subjects: UFOs, cryptids, Bigfoot, just basically anomalous science conferences, even regular science conferences. And it seemed to me, I thought we'd make more progress in 30 years, starting back from the 90s. I think we thought it was just around the next year we're going to get this big paradigm change. And like I say to some of my friends, it's almost like we showed up at the movie previews and we thought the movie was just about to start and we were still in the previews. But it's not something to worry about, because the longer it takes for that actually to happen, the better the outcome is going to be. And the stronger the effect will be, because it gives us time for all these subjects matter, just like Congress is looking at UFOs now, right? It gives us time. I'm sure Bigfoot is next on the list of Congress to eventually look at, because people encounter this on national parks, national forests, so forth. It's an accountability issue for the Park Service and the National Forest Service. But these topics will converge into another subject matter that science, yes, it really seems like it's wanted to avoid it for a long time. I don't read many articles about this in Science magazine, even New Scientist. It's very seldom, and when they mention it, it's derogatory. I sometimes write them letters saying, I don't know why you're being so negative and derogatory about this topic when there's real evidence about it. But don't worry about it too much. I think the reality catches up with everything and with all of us. And if these phenomena are real, like we believe here and we're talking about tonight, and we have the evidence, we have data, eventually newer people come along and just are tired of these older ways. They seem ossified and out of date, just not interesting anymore. And they want to look at these newer subjects. And now here we have scores of witnesses and PEAR labs with 20 years of data. And we can bring it together. We looked at the popularity of that podcast, the telepathy tapes, right? So you can begin to see evidence that reality is catching up with society, and it's like a wave, and it's going to sort of break, and we're going to have a lot of interesting information about this. I think we already see it happening. Just look right here online on the internet, how many podcasts are devoted to these topics. So I think it's very exciting times to be around. And I think every day there's these fascinating new discoveries and witnesses who've come forward, which wouldn't have happened without this sort of magic of technology we have. So I just think the magic's increasing. That's the way I see it. And it's unstoppable. Why? It's fractal. It goes down to the tiniest fractal levels. And no government or society can overrule the trillions of little fractal parts, the microorganisms, the little vortices of energy. Those outnumber us by trillions and trillions to one. In the end, they always win. Either we go along with how nature really works, with all our little tiny friends around, the microorganisms and the energies and the spirits and all these things that are really out there. Either we go along with nature, or nature will just decide we don't deserve to be here. But I think we're going to be on the side where we're here, because we're having this discussion about it right now. Everything we've said tonight, I really believe, is right on line with how reality really works. Not the story we were told in school as kids. And that was just a very limited version, the linear version of this. I think what we were talking about tonight is how it really works. And how it really works, I think, is how things end up. So everyone has a choice. We can go along with how nature works, as we have learned some of the ideas tonight, in my view. I'm sure there's a lot more. Or you can say, no, I want to stick with the way, it's got to be Cartesian, it's got to be Newtonian. I'm not going to move out of my Newtonian framework like Maxwell complained about, and Faraday back in the 1800s, the people that discovered electromagnetism. You look at their writings, Zenka, they were having the same discussions we're having now. Why? People didn't want to believe in electromagnetism. They said, you can't see it. Where is it? I don't see anything. And they wanted everything to be Newtonian. And even Maxwell despaired about this. He said they won't look at the new ideas. They insult us. Same sort of stuff that we've been through. And that was with electromagnetism. Einstein complained they didn't even teach electromagnetism in high school in Switzerland, their equivalent of high school. In the 1890s, it wasn't taught. It was considered to be superstition, paranormal type. Yeah, you see, does anyone question electromagnetism right now? Your light bulb generating light, your internet, your TV, that's all based on electromagnetism. No, we accept it as self-evident. That's how, in my view, it's going to be with all these topics that we've considered to be weird and paranormal. They're just going to be considered to be extended forms of electromagnetism, something like that. And everything that we went through to get here, we'll say, wow, that was worth it because we created a new way of looking at how the universe works.
Indeed, indeed. The curiosity is more powerful than fear, and the quote unquote muggles, the people that are not yet aware of the abilities that we have in our bodies, are coming in droves. Martha Beck came out with a book recently. It's top of the New York Times, and it's called Beyond Anxiety, and she talks about spoon bending and all these other concepts. So all of this stuff is equaling a galactic renaissance, and we're so excited to be sharing this time with you. We thank people like Simeon Hein, who have been through the ridicule and the fortitude of saying, I don't care what anyone thinks, this is how it is, and this is what I'm going to spend my time talking about and researching. So we really owe it to you and the other pioneers for really breaking the ice on all this stuff. So thank you for everything you're doing and continue to do. I always said, well, wow, the ET thing of the consciousness community, the ET thing is the most taboo. And then you're even working on Bigfoot, which is probably even more taboo than the ETs. So just so everyone knows, this is going to be a great time where we're going to find out, hopefully, all the research that has been done with trillions of dollars over the last 50, 60, 70 years. And I just want to leave the broadcast encouraging everyone to try this at home. There's principles that we're talking about today, whether it's spoon bending or psychokinesis or connecting with ancestors, connecting with the water, connecting with ETs, connecting with Bigfoot, right? So you're not going to see it if you can't resonate with it, if you're not asking for it, if you're not, if you're not there and available. So you can ask by commanding your consciousness to prepare you, and ask it to show you how to prepare to resonate in these things. Whether you want to resonate with other scientists, or you want to resonate with Bigfoot, or you want to resonate with ETs, it's possible. It can be done, and it's happening all the time. And please listen to music, because that, like you said, Simeon, is a great way to resonate your body and your life and your joy and your particles in your body. So thanks so much for joining us tonight, everyone. Once again, you can find Simeon at newcrystalmind.com. That's his blog. Fractal Friend is his YouTube, and his Patreon is Dark Matter Mysteries. So thanks again, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, guys. I really enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
Enjoyed it.
Okay.